Okay, it is. I could almost do a countdown here, but it is literally almost 10:30, so I reckon we'll get underway. Um, I'm Tim Ayliffe. I'm a crime thriller author, and I'm really excited to welcome you all here to the Bad Sydney Crime Writers Festival. Today's event about stylish, original spy stories that shake and stir. I didn't write that, but that's what the session's called. Thank you to the Sydney Mechanics School of Arts for giving the festival a new home while the State Library is being renovated. Welcome also to all those joining us on Zoom, including those throughout New South Wales who are watching from home or from your local library. How good are libraries? Please mute your mobile phones and don't record the session. Feel free to share on social media, on Facebook and Instagram, tag @BadCrimesSydney or with the hashtag #BadCrimesSydney on that sewer known as Twitter X. Before I introduce our panellists, it is. But I don't work at the ABC anymore, so I don't have to worry about this stuff. Before I introduce our panellists here with me in the Henry Carmichael Theatre, I would like to pay respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, our nation's first storytellers, whose land we're gathering on today. Now, to the panel. We've got two thriller debutantes and a seasoned spy thriller master. That's you, Jack. I'm sure you're familiar with Jack Beaumont, which is the pseudonym of former French intelligence officer who has written 3 gripping novels, the latest being Liar's Game. Alongside, or near Jack, we've got Sam Guthrie, whose political thriller The Peak was inspired by his 25-year career in foreign affairs, where he has been a senior diplomat, trade envoy to China and political lobbyist, and has lived and worked in places like Shanghai, Hong Kong and Europe. And lastly, we have Nick Croydon, whose life heading up QBD's 91 bookstores wasn't busy enough. He decided to write a thriller too. The Turing Protocol is a clever reimagining of history involving a time machine and enigma code breaker, Alan Turing. Welcome, everybody. Now, I'm sure many of you have questions, and there'll be time in the last 10 or 15 minutes, and we'll take those. But look, before I wanted to get started, prepared some questions, but I wanted to get that news overnight of the assassination, effectively is what it is, of Charlie Kirk, the Trump youth supporter, I guess you'd call him. There's been several political assassinations already in the US this year. I might start with you, Jack, just on intelligence and what they're thinking about, particularly, I guess, foreign, when it's abroad, which would have been the things you were thinking about when you were working for the DGSE. But this stuff, is it getting worse? Are we going to see more of it?
I don't know if we're going to see more of it. I think, unfortunately, yes. I mean, it's getting harder and harder to identify or track lonely wolves like this killer. In terms of pure intelligence, when we were setting operations for assassinations or this kind of stuff, you have so many layers and it's so complex to set up this kind of action. How you get out of the country, because of course you don't want anyone to know who is behind when it's real intelligence. So it's how do you get out of the country, how you get the weapon, how do you leave no traces, how you get the false identity, who is helping you in the country and this kind of stuff. Where here it seems to be a bit different. It's pure, ideology and hate. And I think, yes, we're living in a world of, with more and more haters everywhere, and it becomes increasingly dangerous.
Well, I asked turn to Sam here. I might just get you to move the mic just a little bit around closer, so that might be a bit louder.
Better now?
Give it a go.
Yeah, now 1, 2, 3, 4. Better?
I think it's all right. Yeah, it's better. Thanks, Michael. So yeah, Sam, you were a diplomat overseas for a very long time, having leaders, important people coming through. What's your reaction to what happened, and also what was going through your mind about the situations that you find yourself, I guess, overseas preparing for these sorts of risks?
Well, from a diplomat's perspective, diplomacy is based on the idea that you keep on talking as long as possible, which from a boring bureaucratic perspective can sometimes be very tedious, but on the other end, it actually is a deterrence to violence. It stops or it delays violence. It's war by other means. And so I think it's a tragedy when you see something like this that's happened to Charlie Kirk. Not that I subscribe to any of his political views, but this is a response to those political views through violence as opposed to debate, and a society being fractured in an incapacity for them to be open in their debate. And in fact, I understand that the question that he was answering at the time of the assassination was a question from someone who didn't support his political views. It was about gun violence. He was responding and then he got shot even before he could get out his line. So I think that's tragic. And from a diplomat's perspective, it's always a tragedy when the talking stops, because that's when the violence can begin. What I was always really grateful for, taking a leader, prime minister around China, or ministers, or a delegation of ministers, we obviously needed to do a lot of the, taking care of hotel rooms, ensuring that they were clean of bugs and video cameras and the like. But what I was always quite proud of, other than the prime minister and deputy prime minister, our ministers travelled with staff. They didn't travel with guards. In a place like where I was, in Hong Kong or in Shanghai. And it's similar to when you see some ministers in Australia walking the streets of Canberra and of New South Wales. I think that's something to be proud of.
I won't be unfair and put you on the spot on that, Nick, because you haven't not lived the world these guys have. So I want to turn to our books now, to the books. And there's something common in all of them, which is they all involve incredibly high stakes, as in end of the world kind of high stakes. So Nick, I want to start with you and ask, where'd your idea come from? And in the answer, give us a bit of a scene setter for the book as well.
Sure. So I've been in love with history since I was probably 5 or 6 years old. So it starts there. My second passion is mathematics. So I studied Turing when I was at university in England. Absolutely love the guy. I think he was on a level of like Newton, Da Vinci. It's a real shame that he didn't get to live. I think we'd be in a different world. He was talking about AI in 1953. So it was the idea came from my respect for him. And then I needed to make it a fast-paced action thriller. So you had to introduce the fiction part of the story. So what I loved about the process was, because I'm a historian, the sort of trick I used in the book was to mix non-fiction, actual fact, with the fiction, and hopefully blur them to the point that the reader would go, is he telling the truth now or not? And have to go look it up. Right, and when they tell me that, I had to go and Google that, or I had to go and get the history book out and see. I thought, okay, I got you, right? So it was through that love that the story came.
How about you, Sam? I guess simple question: why'd you write The Peak?
Look, I was living in Hong Kong. I was sitting in a place called the China Club. It's a fancy-ish club in the middle of Hong Kong. Looks out over the city skyline, and I was there with a friend from high school who I'd known for whatever it was, some 30 years. And usually you'd sit out there and it'd be a pleasant, lovely evening. On this particular evening, helicopters were buzzing the street and there was tear gas sort of floating across as protesters were being chased by police down into the MTR tunnels. And for me, it was that here we are, the two of us, childhood friends, witnessing history up close, a real turning point in history. And that, to me, is what I wanted to explore. I love that tradition of the Le Carre novels, where you learn about the big picture, geopolitical things, but you learn about it through the eyes of a character, and often a flawed character, three-dimensional characters. And I guess the bone that I wanted to pick was that a lot of those, we're still talking a lot about the Cold War, or there's a lot of that is focused on the Middle East, maybe that sort of writing. I felt I wanted to bring it back to what I knew and what is also, the geopolitical struggle of the 21st century, which will be between China and the US, and Australia sits right in the middle of that. So I wanted to really take that genre and center it here.
It is a bit odd, isn't it? I mean, we're living in, we're 26, I'm looking at my watch, I don't know why it doesn't do years, but we're living in the China century. It's 2025, and we're in the China century, and yet there aren't a hell of a lot of books, written, or spy thrillers written about China. Yeah. Why is that?
Well, I think it's often a taboo subject. I talk about there was a newspaper article a couple of years ago called Red Alert, where a number of very intelligent people, be from cybersecurity, a former chief scientist, and others, wrote about what would happen. What are the scenarios that would occur if China invaded Taiwan? And some of those were quite extreme, but well worth a discussion. Well worth ventilating what could happen and what would that mean for the US, for China, and for Australia. But when they published that, they were jumped upon. They were told, you shouldn't be writing this stuff. You shouldn't be writing it. People like Paul Keating and others, because they were worried for various reasons, one including, the rivers of gold that can fly between our major trading partner. To me, that's not a positive thing. If we want to live in a democracy and have informed people that need to vote, we should understand about what these scenarios are. But you can do that in a boring way, or you can do it in a fast-paced thriller, lots of thrills and spills kind of way.
Jack, just turning to you, this is your third book in the series, and like the others, it sails really close to the truth. Does begin in Beijing actually as well. But so what's it about?
Well, as you know, what I wanted to do from the very beginning is to write about the reality of that job. That is not James Bond or Jason Bourne. And that is very dark, and because I lived it myself. And to explain all this psychological aspect of it, I need a global geopolitical plot and a background. So for the first one, it was biochemical weapons. Second one was about Russia, Ukraine, and energy around the Med Sea. And the third one is between basically China and India. Because, of course, the demography is now the biggest threat for China is India, and about AI. And so that gives me the context to use the same characters as the two first books for a different mission on a different topic, following the evolution of the world on that trend with China and AI and all the apps you're using and all the financial systems.
And you talked about your main character, Alec Depayne, and I want to just stay with him for a minute. He does a job a lot like the one you once did. Tell us a little bit more about Alec and where he came from.
So I used to, well, still a bit, but have PTSD and a lot of nightmares. And so I tried to go and see some, psychoanalyst and all this kind of stuff. And of course, when you arrive in front of this kind of person and you say, I used to be a fighter pilot, then I used to be a special forces, then I used to be a spy, they go like, yeah, right. So it's not
Loony.
So it was not the best way for me. And so one of my mates said to me, well, maybe you should just write it down. And so that's how everything started. And I wrote it thinking that no one was going to read it. It was just for myself as a pure cathartic process. So, of course, the main character is myself. And I wrote at the third person to be able to put all my emotions and my feelings into him so that I could, unload my soul and my mind into this character. So he's married with two sons, exactly like I am. And so the descriptions of the character, of the kids, of the wife, of the place he lives is actually, 100% true. Yeah.
And really well done, by the way. I think it's kind of a refreshing take on a spy thriller when you get that real sense of the struggle inside the spy. Something I really enjoyed about your books. Nick, characters in your book, there's a lot of big ones. What was it like writing those huge characters in history? Reading through it, suddenly I'm, in a room with Oppenheimer and Churchill and Eisenhower and, of course, Turing himself.
Yeah. So again, because the history angle, I loved writing about actual people, real people who are real historical figures. I've read a lot about Churchill. He's a favorite of mine. I think it was really interesting putting words into their mouths, right, and having it come out. And I think that added to the intrigue. And then being able to develop a real person like Turing and put some fictional elements to that was just was like freedom, right? Because as a fiction writer, you can make stuff up, right? That's what we do. But what I also wanted to do, and it's a bit like the guys here were talking about, is also evaluate the responsibility they had. So you say about Oppenheimer, okay, I'm in the book. I make him meet with Turing and there's Einstein in there as well, just for added flavor. But the thought of what someone like Oppenheimer would have gone through, I think he would have started as a physicist and a scientist, and it would have been an amazing challenge to build the bomb. But then at some point, he probably would have realized he was going to be successful, right? And then it's like, well, he knows what's going to happen. This is going to be delivered to a government, right? And his efforts and his sort of moral footprint is now on a bomb, which he knows is completely destructive. And then when it actually got used, and we know in real life, there was a lot of regret after it got used by him. Right? I wanted to develop that, and then ask the question: what if you had that power? Right? Even our prime ministers today, they have that power. Right? They can press buttons. They can send fleets. They can. It's an immense responsibility, and often not talked about. I think they talk about having too many gin and tonics in a bar, right? And that's terrible. But what about the responsibility they have for a whole country? Quite intimidating. So.
And also that idea that, well, it's obviously with the bomb, but other like mass either acts of violence or like sometimes the result of a key decision by one individual can just change the world. Yeah. And you look at 9/11, for instance.
So 9/11 for me was interesting to write about because I knew, and you would have known this obviously with your job. There was plenty of red flags. And there was plenty of reports saying there was pilots being trained in Florida and across flight schools in America, where they weren't even practicing landings. There was a reason for that. Right? So yeah, I kind of found that fascinating.
Any thoughts on that, Jack?
Sorry?
Any thoughts on that?
What, on not landing?
Well, no. Well, I'm not going to ask you about your fighter plane crash because you
must have landed.
Yeah, I only crashed twice.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I have to ask you about it now.
Well,
Okay.
you flew with me. You came.
I did.
Flew for
Okay, I'm going to set
aerobatics.
Yeah, I set it up. So Jack was a fighter pilot for the French military Air Force before he was a spy, and still keeps his flying hours up now, and decided to invite me to go up in a little stunt plane. And he said, "Have you ever experienced G-force?" I said, "No, I haven't." And he said, "We're going to do 4 Gs up here. You'll be fine." And I'm sitting in the back of this plane, and he's going, "Are you ready?" And we're doing loop-de-loops, and I'm hanging on in the back. And anyway, on my Instagram feed, you can see I put a little highlights reel. It was quite horrific. But anyway, and now he's warned if I did ask him this question, which I've now inadvertently done because I couldn't stop thinking about it, he's going to take me up again and we'll go beyond 4, I'd imagine, 4 Gs. But give us a quick summary on it because it's remarkable what you did in terms of when you landed that plane after what happened with your back.
So it was in the Air Force. I was flying single seaters for dogfight. So it's called the Mirage 2000. So it's a big jet, and you can each turn you take 9 Gs, so 9 times your weight. So the blood is going down to the legs. The heart is going down of 6-7 centimeters in the chest. And the brain is like a pancake. That's why we have no brain when we are. And so it's very, very violent for the body. And I pulled basically more than 9 Gs because I was looking behind and I've been pulling too strongly on the stick, basically. allowing the plane to go up to 11.3 Gs. But I was looking behind, so my spine was twisted and pressurized in the same time at 11.3 Gs, which means that roughly putting 600 kilos on my lower back, but twisted. So I had 3 discs popping out on the left side of the spine and pinching all the nerves of the left leg. The problem is that to land the plane, you control the front wheel with the legs and you brake on the top of the feet. And so my left leg was not working anymore. So I had the order on the radio to go and eject, but the issue is ejection is 25 instant Gs. So if I would have ejected, then I would have been in the chair for the rest of my life. So I took the decision to land the plane. It was a nice weather and not too much wind and stuff. I had a brilliant idea on the paper, just on the paper, which was to leave my right leg smooth because the left one was not working, and press on my knees with my hands to try to keep the axe of the runway. Of course, it didn't work. So I landed because we land at 180 knots, so it's 340 km/h. And only the right leg had been pushing, so the plane went on the right side of the runway. And the landing gear went in when I touched the grass, and then I went on a fireball on the right side of the runway on a few hundred meters. And I woke up at the hospital after the surgery. And I was back in a jet 6 weeks after.
Wow. Well, thanks for sharing that. And I now am really worried about our next flying experience. Because I can say the G-force, the way to describe it, one thing that you said to me, Jack, is when we're in the plane, you flex every muscle in your body to try to keep the blood flowing so it doesn't all run up to your head because you just pass out. So I'm literally sitting there just flexing everything I can, and it's the most remarkable and scary and awful feeling. But anyway, it was pretty fun at the same time. All right, we spent enough time on that. Sorry, I'm in trouble now. Sam, you've worked with and around people at the top of the tree in politics and intelligence. What was it like fictionalising that world, and how close did you sail to the truth?
I keep on focusing on how easy my commute was to get here in comparison to that now. So it's it was helpful because I wrote what I knew, and so the voice and the issues came out very, very quickly. My concern was that I was going to rub some people up the wrong way. Be it in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade or other agencies, and so we did the appropriate thing and had it checked out by offered it to be checked out by various security agencies, and happily there were no issues and that went forward. So my greatest concern was obviously the Chinese government would have some issues. Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade might have some issues. The group I didn't expect would have issues were my old all-boys private school that I put the boot into a little bit in the book, and they've apparently had some issues. So they're the only ones that I've heard from. So yeah, that was it.
The private school thing, and that experience for you, and then the way you characterise in the book, and also the way you used, I guess, music of the time and all of that. It was great character development. Obviously, part of it autobiographical, and we've heard from Jack talk about that a little bit already with Alec DePayne. How was that for you, and in sharing that experience?
Well, I wanted these characters, as I said, to be three-dimensional, and so to do that, I drew on my youth. So the book is really about, it's two friends from high school, Sebastian and Charlie, and when we first meet them, they're in Hong Kong. They've gone over there for the handover. It's 1997 in Hong Kong, and they both fall in love with a Chinese woman, and there's a real sort of testing of their loyalty to each other, and it results in a betrayal that haunts them for the rest of their lives. And then we meet them some 30 years later when Sebastian's a minister, an assistant minister in Parliament House, and Charlie is his chief of staff. And Sebastian hears from the girl in China, from the father, and does something really horrific within the first 5 minutes. To really get into their characters, to get into their minds, I wanted to draw in my own friendships. The music helps because it sort of takes you back into those places and those times where you've been. But then there's also, when you're in a place like Beijing or in Hong Kong and you're working for government, you do go through, obviously you have to have a security clearance and you get a degree of training, nothing like what Jack's been through, but you get a degree of training as to what to watch out for in these places. And you need to be vetted. You need to, there's various government agencies that will ask all your friends, is he an alcoholic and who's he had sex with? And, are there any dark things in his past? And so you find yourself living a lot in your head. You're told, things might happen in your house. The television might come on, and if the television comes on, it means someone's bugging the apartment. Someone might come and knock on the door, and they'll tell your maid that they're there to change the lights, but they're there to put in, a listening device or something. And you begin to live your life sort of stuck in your head or locked in, which is a theme that comes in through the book. And so I was contrasting the idea of these two very close friends who have shared so much and in many ways in debt to each other, and yet there's something locked in, a secret that sits between them that ultimately it's only after this horrible thing happens in the very first chapter that throughout the rest of the course of the book we're trying to understand, well, what has been locked in that character and why does it potentially mean the end of the world?
How about you, Nick? Was there any parts of yourself that you gave up for the book?
Yeah, I think what we've all said, and it's quite common across the three books, is I was told by Fiona McIntosh actually that you should always write about what you know, right? For your first book, right? That's kind of safe ground, right? And I took that on board. And I think what's interesting in all three of the titles, which I enjoyed your books immensely, is the level of authenticity, right? So, all of us have spent time in the countries that we're writing about. I've got a lot of Spain in my book. I've got a lot of England in my book, Washington in my book. Yeah, and spent a lot of time in those places. So it's easy to describe, the Grand Ballroom at the Savoy in London because, I've been there, right? But I think that's really lovely for the reader to experience. When I kind of hope people, when they go to Spain, if they've read the book, they might try and find the Plaza Oriente and sit down there and enjoy a beer watching the sun go down, or nip into Harrods and say, are there really tunnels underneath? Now, I know there are, right? Because I worked there for Deloitte, and I counted gold bars in the bank and all those sort of things. It was a crazy time. But it was great content, right, to write about that. So I think we all give up some of our own experiences into the writing because that's what we know. And I think it's a good thing.
Jack, I want to come back to you. And don't take this as a direct question about the DGSE, because French Foreign Intelligence, obviously DGSE and how it works, but there are power games aplenty in Liar's Game. What can you tell us about the relationship between spies and their political masters?
Well, the thing is, when you spy, you are serving your country. You're not serving an individual. So it doesn't really matter. Of course, you have some main strategic plans which are decided for the following years, which are kind of the long run of things you have to do. And then you have punctual missions depending on what's happening in the world. But as soon as you talk about human intelligence, means recruiting sources, human sources, manipulating human sources, and this kind of stuff, it takes some time to do it, to approach the people, to enter their lives, to manipulate them, and take the intelligence from their minds. Except in rare countries where the leverage to manipulate those people is obviously money, and they want the money now. So it's quick and efficient on the short term, because it usually creates lots of doubts after, because they want more money, so they're bullshitting you with bullshit information. But you don't really have normally a political master. Some people, of course, and you can't stop it from happening in the company, have their own political belief, and sometimes want to see things, the way they want to see them.
So in the back of the book, you have like an organization chart.
Yeah.
Right? Which struck me as like could have been any corporate company that you were describing.
Yeah, absolutely.
It seemed very much like
Yeah.
you have your management boss and he has his boss. And
Yeah, absolutely. And it's and the more you climb up the scale, more you have, of course, people, not saying self-interested, but looking after their own career, of course, because they're looking after the next, job they're gonna get. And so who they must please in the Élysée Palace, on the presidency of France to get that job after. And so, of course, it's giving a direction of, where the company is meant to work. But normally, to give you an idea, that's a very funny story, but each time you have an election, presidential election in France, we know that for fact, one of the first things that the new president will do is to come to the headquarters of the company to check the files on him.
yes.
So what we do is before the election, we change all the files names to bullshit names. Then they come, they ask for their files. There is nothing on it. They're very happy. They walk away. And then we put it back to the real name. So, yeah.
Oh, that's clever. I was going to ask you a question about files as well, because after, for instance, field operations, when you're back, or Alec Depayne is back and writing up a report, there's a report that is for effectively your trusted team and unit, and then there's a report for others. Talk to us a little bit about that, and I guess it's the idea of the truth of it. Which is the kernel that's most important, etc.
So when you come back from a mission, you have 2 reports to do. And one of them is going to be read by the analysts. And it's all about the intelligence itself that you got without any possibility to give anyone a clue on where it comes from. It's just about the raw intelligence. And then the second report, which is not going to the same people, is about what happened and how you obtain this intelligence and more information you got about the human source who gave you the information. So there are 2 different levels of authorization to be read. And they're not going to the same people. They're going to the people who are managing the sources and deciding for what the next steps are. And the other one is going to the analyst who is in charge of and was specialized on his topic. And he doesn't know where it comes from. He doesn't know who is the source. He doesn't know how it was acquired, etc. All he knows is the raw intelligence that the juice you got out of the operation.
Oh, thanks for sharing that. It's fascinating. Nick, you trace so many big moments in history right up to now. I want to get a little sense of how you went about, I guess, researching some of that stuff as well. And because there's like intelligence and military and all these things crossed, and I know, hopefully it's not an unfair question, but yeah, how did you go about researching that and to get the authenticity stuff that you were talking about earlier?
Yeah, so it was quite a challenge being nearly 80 years, right? But I did that on purpose because I wanted a lot of pace. I love pace in a novel myself, and so I thought, well, if I can keep the tempo up high, then they'll keep turning the page, which is what you want your reader to do. But then I also had to make sure it was accurate. One of the worst things that happened to me during the editorial process is I think I'd written something like 14 pages about D-Day, down to the commander of every division, right? And the editor was just like, red pen, page after page, thrown on the floor. I was like, my works, like my research. I'd spent hours in the Imperial War Museum checking everything, and then just cut. So that was quite daunting. But I spent a lot of time in the fabulous museums that we have all over the world doing the research. I've been to Bletchley Park, up teen times. I know the Turing family. Right, so I had interesting chats with them.
Well, can we stay with that for a minute? What's their reaction been to the book?
So they've only just got it because it was published in the UK a month after. So the great nephew John is currently reading it. He's on holiday, and I'm waiting. But we we had an interesting debate about the actual death of Turing, because I came up obviously with this. I should probably say too much for the spoilers, but I gave an alternative death, and somewhat more accidental, if you like, because what I couldn't work out was when I was doing the research is, he'd been through this terrible chemical castration, but he was out the other side, so he was getting better. He also he had an invitation to the Scientific Society in London, literally 5 days later. 2 weeks later, he had a trip planned to America, a place he absolutely adored. It just didn't make sense to me that you'd gone through all that, and you had all these things that you like doing, and that's the day you choose to commit suicide. And so we had that debate, and he told me that the family had that debate too, right? So because the evidence, 1950 policing, not quite the same as it is today, was just a report on a suicide. So they decided in the end to run with that. Right? They said there was, contrary to any evidence, they had to accept that, but they certainly had a debate.
It's interesting. Sam, I want to talk a little bit more about China and authenticity with what you've done with your story. It's right down to the food and things I've sort of alluded to earlier. How important for you was to get that on the ground in China, because so much of the book is set in China.
It was, I mean, I wanted to write an authentic book as much as I could. I was very aware of a couple of things. One, I'm not Chinese, and so it was writing it through very much, an old white guy's eyes, coming in and having that experience. I also wanted to make sure that it didn't read like China as the bad guys and the Americans were great or the Australians were great. So, many of the characters are flawed in it. But I wanted to really capture the thing that struck me over the years that I've been engaging with China is the way, particularly when Westerners come into contact with China, that they are just overwhelmed by it. And in being overwhelmed, I think the pathways to being compromised by it are quite rife. For a period of time, the working title was called The Compromise as opposed to The Peak, because the book does document about how intelligent, successful people can find themselves being compromised in China or in another country. And, I wanted to focus on normal people, real everyday people, and what happens, be they ministers or be they on a business delegation, and when they go into a place like China and they're unaware of those sort of risks. And I think for a period of time, particularly between 2000 and 2015, everyone was loving how much of the financial opportunity there was doing trade between China and Australia. And it was only after 2016 and maybe a change in leadership where we began to realize that there were some hairs on this as well, that there were some risks. As I have said before, I've seen those up close in those trade delegations. When someone in one of the delegates will come to you the next morning and say, well, there's a video camera in the bathroom mirror and in my hotel room, and they're waiting to, capture something that can be used against me. Or I get the call late at night by someone saying, I brought someone back to my room, my hotel room, and now she won't leave. And what do I do about that? And we see it too in ministers or in other senior level business people or bureaucrats who have just found the too good an option to get the political donation from a property developer for whatever purpose. Maybe they'll show up on television talking about the benefits of China in the South China Sea, or indeed even more recently. And I cast no aspersions, and I don't want to be in any way seen as open to a libel case, but what was Daniel Andrews doing on stage with Vladimir Putin last week? And so in this sort of context...
It's a private citizen, Sam.
Private citizen, he can do what he likes. But whether or not his mind is open to the risks of compromise remains to be seen. And I have so much respect for the work of people who do service like Jack and people within the Australian government who do similar sort of service. It's usually those who don't have the training, don't have the knowledge, that find themselves in the middle of something like that are vulnerable to compromise. And so for me, painting the China picture was painting the picture of the wide-eyed, somewhat ignorant person working into it and falling afoul.
The Russians call it the kompromit. It's the just on that, I want to get your thoughts there, Jack, around not just, I guess, the compromise, but how have spy techniques changed over the years? like
For what?
today.
For clandestine operations, or
Yeah.
for recruiting humans, or for entering a country, or for
Oh, well, for like recruiting and clandestine operations, maybe let's just stick with those two. I don't know if we've got time for the rest, but we'll see.
I mean, human is human, so I'm not sure, really changed. But to go back to what Sam was saying, you have different cases. Let's say you have some people who are ignorant, having the intelligence in their minds, and they are not trained to protect it, and they don't realize they have it. And they have a nice little life, and they go to the office in the morning, and they have access to some critical information without even realizing this information is critical. Then you have the people who are aware that the information they got is actually, a bit touchy, but they're not trained to protect it. And then you have the people who are well aware and are well trained to protect it. And so approaching those people and recruiting those people, you will have to apply different strategies because, of course, the one who is trained to protect it, it's going to be much harder to recruit this person. And so you need a much stronger leverage on this person. If it's someone who is a bit ignorant and naive, then it's going to be a different methodology as well. So let's say you can be kind of gentle on people who are untrained and a bit naive, because you know that they're going to fall in the trap quite easily. And then you need sometimes to be very offensive to some people who are trained to protect this intelligence, because it's not a picture from the bathroom or having sex with a sparrow or something which is going to change anything. So you need to, enter their room. And I saw some guys, sleeping like in movies, sleeping with the briefcase on the night table, attached to the briefcase and sleeping, and the briefcase is
Handcuffs, yeah.
yeah, and the briefcase is closed and with a code and everything. So, and you want what is in the briefcase. So yeah, at some point you have to do something. So that's for the human. But from the moment you recruited those people, then the human manipulation, as soon as the leverage is there, the mice, so the four leverages to manipulate someone: M for money, I for ideology, C for coercion, and E for ego. They are the four leverages. And from the moment you have identified this mice, or the mice of the person, and put in place the mice, usually after, it's going to be on the long term, depending on what kind of information the person can provide. And then for the techniques on the field, weirdly enough, because of the evolution of the techniques and the technology, we actually have to go backwards. So we mustn't have a mobile phone on the field, all this kind of stuff, because of course you can be tracked very easily. So we communicate with the stickers we put in different places, which means different things.
Dropping in bus shelters and things like that.
But yeah, absolutely. So you put stickers a bit everywhere, which have different meanings.
Comments.
The
Comments?
Gomets, yeah.
Yeah.
So to enter a country, before in the 80s, 90s, you could, have lots of different passports and different identities. But now with biometrics, it's very hard, because each time you're going to enter, especially countries like China, they take everything. So you can play on your own passport, on the chip. You can play on which fingers have been kept on the chip, and then you can play around with a few passports. But if you really want to enter a country in clandestinity and without leaving any traces, then you have to go back to the old methodologies, which is basically jumping at night. Right? That's the only way. So the more the technology evolves, the more you have to go back to the kind of Second World War.
Yeah, fascinating. I had an AFP contact of mine, and I was asking about stealing documents out of a defense department. And I said, what's they're trying to come up with all these clever ways to do it. And he just said, just hold on, just you walk the document out. Because as you're saying, technology, it's doing so much, but it's also leaving a trail that, and you can be caught out on. I want to change speeds a little bit. We've got about 15 minutes to go, so start thinking about your questions, and I'll start taking some soon. But Nick, it's interesting having someone like you in the room because of all the 91 bookstores that you're in charge of, as well as being an author. What's it like being an author on the other side of it, having been a bookseller effectively for so long, and then being out on the road and talking about a book?
Yeah, it was incredibly shocking for me to see what it was like for a debut author out there, which is hard. Right? Yeah, I was kind of, I know what QBD does. I know we do things pretty quickly. We're very, we support Australian authors is part of our DNA. Right? We invented the Book of the Month specifically for debuts to give that boost to sales and put them on the map, and and that's worked. So for me then to go on the other side, I'm not sure if it's dark or light yet, but and experience the challenges, because obviously I've never been going into Kmart or Big W for books, but I had to for here, to see how the struggle to get the space, right, to be put in the right place. Like if you're just stuck on the back in the A to Z spine out, you've got no chance of making sales. Right? You're going to get the odd person who might have come to an event like this and, I'm just going to go and ask. Right? But most people browse. Right? And for us, they browse with passionate booksellers, which is the best way. But it's not the only way. So the other stores out there definitely have their place, right? And you wouldn't get the volume without the DDSs, right?
That's the discount department stores.
Yeah, and which is Big W and Kmart and Target. So they sell a lot of volume. They're selling it very cheap. That's their power. But even there, if you're spine out around the back, you're not going to make the sales. You need to be on those end caps, right? So and they call them new releases, right? And you go, oh, that's where I should be, and you're not there. Right? And it's like, why aren't I there? It's a new release, and it's like, oh, because maybe someone else, put in some additional funding to be there. Yeah. You go to the airports, and again, you've got to be on those Book of the Month plinths, or you've got to be on the choices. Again, you don't want to be just spine out. Ideally, you want to be on the chart, right? But again, and someone said, "Oh, it's great." He said, "I saw your book everywhere in the airport." I said, "Yeah, that's not necessarily a good thing, right? To see it everywhere, they should be going out of the airport." Right? So, and the publishers explained to me like, "Oh, yeah, well, the airports are part of our marketing plan. It's about vision, right? They're not necessarily just focused on the sale, right? They reckon you have to see a cover 8 or 9 times for it to register in your brain that that's a title that you might want." So I was learning all this, and then I learned, obviously just how powerful the marketing. If you haven't got the right marketing, we were talking about, if you're not in country, right, to promote your book, right, which is a challenge for all of us when it goes to the UK or to America, unless we're going to go there and do a marketing tour, which you probably should, right? So yeah, learning all that, and that's when the best thing I got out of the tour that I did, obviously, was I got to see a lot of my teams, which was amazing, which everyone experiences when they go into one of our stores. I think I tell them to treat authors like rock stars, right? Because that's what they are. And I was explaining to the guys, I've come back with a kind of a challenge to myself to keep a certain amount of space, especially this time of year. In October, we get flooded with all the big releases. Right? It started already with Dan Brown, right? So they're all coming, and they all want the space. They all want the prime selling space. But I've just decided to retain some space for the guys who are on book 1, book 2, book 3, that just need that extra, don't want to be spine out. Right? So I'm gonna put that into play for this Christmas and see if we can't move some volume.
feel like I should have been taking some notes throughout that whole conversation, but and I can also imagine us authors running around the country rearranging our books in bookstores. But anyway, we won't.
You should definitely do that.
Yeah.
Merchandising.
Any questions? Please raise your hand. We've got lots. Great. Start with you. Come back to your wing.
My question is for Sam. You said that, and hear the cadence, Sam. It's always a tragedy when the talking stops because that's when the violence begins. Pretty good. My question is, Putin and Netanyahu are talking to distract from violence they have no intention of stopping. Are they beyond diplomacy?
That's a well-framed question. I think I should have added the caveat that when sincere talking continues, that's diplomacy. When there is an openness to understand and empathize with the position of the other, that's when diplomacy is likely to work. When it is just vacuous talking to delay that enables you to continue on with your war plan, that's a different thing entirely. So I would differentiate between those two.
Next question. Got wing down here. Old colleague of mine from the ABC.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a question about talking as well, but from a writer's perspective. I think while you mentioned a lot of technology and action about stealing intelligence, these days, like the modern espionage involves a lot of conversation, like exchanging intelligence. What does that mean for you to approach writing conversations when spy genre is always such an action-driven novel?
I think it comes down to, I'll kick off on that. I think it comes down to character development as well. You've got to humanize the people in the plot. So you need to have action, supported by really good dialogue and good character development, because you've got to care about the people in the book to be along for the ride. What else do we think, guys?
Yeah, I would say my main character becomes a politician, but she's also runs a family. So again, I've got two boys. Funny enough, two boys are in my book. Yeah, because again, you're writing about what you know. So yeah, I think character development, empathy for the struggle between their work life and their home life. People can resonate with that.
Well, it's sometimes hard to push for no action and the reality of intelligence. Sometimes you have a pressure from the publisher saying, we want more action. Yeah, you have to put an action scene. And you go like, yeah, well, in reality, you wouldn't have this action scene. And also with the editors, where they usually have their own vision of what is intelligence through the movies or TV series. And so they try to, modify or add some stuff which are totally unrealistic. And so if you are aiming for realism, then you have to fight for it.
Just very quickly, I was worried that there wasn't enough action in mind. There's a lot of conversation. I think what saves it is the ticking clock. It's you have the pace within a certain set period of time, and then the stakes are very, very high. But I was worried about that, and I said to my agent, "Are you sure that we should have more car chases in this?" And his response was, "Sam, you've got a car chase of the mind." And I thought, perfect agent for me.
That's definitely an editor's comment. Where are we going now? Oh, hello.
Hi. I have a question for Nick. You talked about you have Alan Turing and Oppenheimer and, people whom we know about. I studied physics. So how do you decide when you say you put certain words in their mouth and you know their history? So how do you choose what you will make them say, which is fictional, but which fits in with their character? How do you go about that?
Very carefully. Yes, very carefully. So you start with the facts. So you start with your research, and I've read multiple books about Churchill. You tend to get a feeling for the way he speaks. If you listen to his speeches, right, and read his speeches, you get a flavor for how he used to talk. He does a lot of psychological things. He talks about he always has three things, right? That's a well-known speech trick, right? So research and then making it fit your plot. Yeah, and the great thing is, again, it's fiction, right? Some people forget that sometimes, right? It is fiction, so you're allowed to make stuff up.
Thank you. This is for all of you. How do you feel about bibliographies at the end of your book to show where you have done your research?
I love a bibliography. Because I love it when I read a book that has a bibliography that I can go and find out more about, what's been, where the writer's got the information from, or where I can read more about the subject that's really interested me. So I've got an author's note in the back of it, and I go through and I talk about this is where I've taken it. And on top of that, there's some stuff that I don't know, and I have relied on these people, and so it is appropriate that I recognize them and don't plagiarize other people's work. And the final thing is that I'm really lucky that I was able. One of the key people that I drew on was a writer called Louisa Lim, who wrote this stunning book, the most beautiful book called Indelible City, about Hong Kong and the history of Hong Kong. And I was so delighted to have her launch the book for me in Melbourne. So to be able to interact with other authors like that, I think is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I also had an author's note. I listed some books which I relied on heavily, and others less so. I didn't write down every single extract I read in a museum or anything like that, because it would be another 30 pages. But I noted the conversations with people that were important to the plot.
I can imagine with you, Jack, you'd do a bibliography and the DGSC would do a rip. That's can't go in there. I'm sorry.
No, I don't have any. I'm just, it's based on my own memories.
Yeah, I always usually include one, but just as a few, if you're interested in some of the themes that were raised in this book, here's some books I read along the way, kind of thing, or point them to speeches. For instance, a speech that Putin gave informed one of my books. So, yeah.
Firstly, thank you for a fabulous session. The question I want to ask is, to what extent do you start your book with a framework that has a conceived end, quite visualized, and to what extent do you go with the flow?
Okay, I can go with that. Once I had the initial idea and started doing the research, the first thing I do is like a chapter plan. So for me, I'm very numerical, right? And also I run an organization. I need a plan. I always have to have a plan and a strategy, and I like my numbers. So for me, having a chapter plan sets out the framework for the book, and then you do some more research, and then once you start, you can refer back to the chapter plan, but it never follows. Because once you've researched something else, you're like, oh, I've got to write about that, and that's not in the plan at all, right? So it has to be adaptable, but it's good to bring. For me, it sets like a little bit of discipline. I used to set myself a target of number of words I'd write a week, or just so I could keep on track.
What was the target?
It was 8,000 a week.
That's a lot.
Yeah, I didn't get there. I did about 5.
Good to be aspirational.
I did about 5.
How about you, Sam?
I had 3 points that I wrote to. I knew I wanted an opening that was, like Hammer in Scrublands came and punched you right in the nose when you first read it and grasped you from that first moment. And so I tried to write a beginning like that. I knew where I wanted it to end. There needed to be this end of the world as we know it type opportunity. And then in the middle of it, I knew that I wanted everything that the reader had got to up to that middle to then turn back on itself and play back in the opposite way. So I had those 3 very clear points and what they were, and either side of those, I had no idea what was going to happen. And for me, that's where the beauty came, because it was, you're surprising yourself in the strange little stream of voices, wherever it comes from, inspiration. That's what took it.
Well, like Sam, I need to find out the beginning first. I need the big, slap in the face. Then I pick up the general topic of which I want to talk about, and the ending as well. Then I'm very organized, and what keeps me awake at night is to find the twist, because in real life, in real intelligence, there are no twists.
I'm a bit similar with probably that I always know how a book starts, know how it's mostly going to end, and a couple of big beats along the way. But of course, it changes, as Nick has pointed out, and you roll with it and hopefully surprise yourself, because if you can do that, you're going to surprise your readers.
One of the things I enjoyed was when you're doing the research and then you find something that perfectly fits a character you're trying to develop, right? And it's like, and it's real, right? And you're like, oh, that's just going straight on the page, right? You know, and it's like that's magic.
Look, we're almost at time. I'm interested in a couple more questions from me, if everyone doesn't mind. Do we have another one in the crowd? Okay, one more, and then I'll get mine in.
For Mr. Guthrie, as you drew on your own career in writing your book, I assume you had to go through a process of getting some sort of clearance from the government or security agencies. So what's that process like?
Well, it gave me a few sleepless nights. I don't think there is an actual process, probably because, I mean, not to my knowledge, anyone's been dopey enough to write a book like this that comes from that sort of background. But without going into the details, I drew on a couple of people I trusted who were former seniors in DFAT. I showed it to my boss. And then through various different contacts, we offered it up to the security agencies if they had any issue. Not that we would have said we're going to pull the book, because I was very confident that there was nothing in it that was, breaching any classified undertakings I had, but just because we didn't want it to be perceived as something that would worry them. And on the contrary, I actually think that the Peak is written as a cautionary tale, much the way that we see Mike Burgess, the head of ASIO, coming out at increasingly regular intervals to give cautionary tales to the Australian people to say, this is what can happen if you're not conscious about these sort of things. So in that sense, I think ASIO should chip in on the marketing budget.
All right. I think we're almost at time, but I'm interested in the last question for all of you. What's next? What are you writing? Is the next idea starting to spin around? I mean, I know you've obviously got the TV series in development as well, but that continues to take time, Jack. But what's the next book going to be?
I've got number 4 in my head. Need to find that twist, but I've got the topic. I know where it starts.
Alec DePayne, another?
Yeah,
great.
Yeah. And yeah.
No giveaways. It's okay. How about you, Nick?
So I've completed the manuscript for book number 2, and currently going through my structural edit, which is always painful and enjoyable at the same time.
Is it a standalone, or is there a character you've pulled out?
It's a sequel.
It's a sequel. Okay.
Yeah, and then I have a book 3 in my head, and a standalone, also completely different topic that I could choose which one to write next.
Exciting. How about you, Sam?
Well, now I'm intimidated. I owe HarperCollins one in February. I know what it is. I'm about 30,000 words in. It's the same sort of approach. It's a big geopolitical issue, but through the eyes of flawed characters, drawing on some of my own experience.
8,000 words a week, you'd be fine.
Yeah.
It's just going.
5.
Right. I'll just share. I've got a book coming out in January called Dark Desert Road. It's my first standalone.
Which is
very
good.
Very good.
Very good.
Thanks. All right. Anyway, there you go. Little tip. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. It's been wild weather out there. 95 millimetres of rain overnight, I think, in the city. So it's a huge effort for you all to come. I love this festival. I'm here pretty much every year, and it's been a great conversation with you guys. I really enjoyed your books, and I urge you all to go out there and buy one, because everyone will be there to sign their books at the end. So thanks very much for coming.
Thanks, Tim.